All right, so we got some breaking news today, and none of it is good. The situation is looking very bleak around the world today. Gonzalo Lira, Chilean journalist and American citizen, has been captured by the Ukrainian SBU once again, and this is reported by Sarah Cirillo, their spokesperson, today in a video that I'll show you in just a moment. You may not know who he is or what he represents, but I can assure you that it is going to have grave implications for all of us. The State Department knows exactly who he is. They've been questioned about it on numerous occasions, but they're being eerily dismissive of the case. And I believe that this level of indifference is a sign of what's to come for us when martial law is imposed here when the war comes to our doorsteps. Because understand that Ukraine is justifying this suppression of dissident voices under the guise of national security. To what extent will we go to suppress democratic values for the sake of national security? Well, in Ukraine's case, they'll go very far. You can't take pictures, you can't record videos, you can't speak out against the government. In fact, they're not even going to have elections there. So, you may think that it's justified in light of the situation that they are currently in, and you could make some arguments that indeed there should be some tighter restrictions on things. But in this case, this was an American citizen. This is a blueprint for the suppression that is coming our way when the war comes our way. This country that is supposed to be a representative of democracy is doing everything to not be a democracy, it would appear. I guess you gotta be an autocracy to fight an authoritarian government? I don't know. Anyways, we're gonna share a little bit of that video with you, but that is not even as much as, I think that the guy should be released or given a fair trial in the very least. That's unfortunately not even the biggest story that we're facing right now. Ukraine is planning a massive drone strike on Moscow. And if you look at what they've done in the last few days, they've been able to target the same building twice. Same building was targeted twice with near pinpoint precision. Now, you might say to yourself, well, the Russians shot one of them down at the last moment, or we don't know if it hit. We don't really have all the angles. So what this tells me is that maybe their capabilities for drone technology, maybe they've had some help. Of course they've had some help. They're going to plan this massive drone swarm, and this has now been also reported by the Wall Street Journal. We first talked about this a few days ago because, of course, they released that propaganda video telegraphing that they were going to, in fact, do it. And this is a sign that they're getting very desperate on the front lines. The Ukrainians are getting annihilated right now. All the information that I've taken in the last 72 hours, and boy, has there been a lot of it. My eyes are probably bloodshot right now. It's that they're not doing too well, okay? And they're getting desperate. And you can see that they're not doing well because another thing that has happened recently, and this should really scare people. I'm not saying get scared and run into the woods. I'm just saying this should concern people, and this is why NATO is shitting bricks right now. The Russians have been targeting the ports in Odessa, which are just 100 yards away from Romania. They are targeting this location from hundreds of miles away, just a few hundred yards, not even 100 yards. There's vivid video, 4K video footage that Romanians have been shooting of these explosions that are happening right across this body of water. And if you question at all the Russians' ability to do these precision strikes, you can't question it now. Because clearly they understand that one mix-up, just one coordinate too far in one direction, and they send these missiles 100 feet in the other direction. It lands in Romania, it takes out some civilians, and then all of a sudden NATO invokes Article 4 and 5, and we are off to war. So the fact that they're so confident in their capability to target these regions, we're not talking about one or two strikes. They're destroying grain silos, they're destroying the ports, they're basically getting rid of all of the infrastructure. Make no mistake, there is no more grain deal. It's never going to happen again. It's over. This is why the price of wheat has spiked 4% in the past day. And I actually think that it should probably spike a lot more. Probably something to do with the fact that the markets are crashing as a result of the U.S. credit rating downgrade. My friends, it's all interconnected, whether it is the record temperatures, the fires, the wars that are being waged, the political upheaval, the dissident voices being suppressed. It all happens. It's, what do the Christians call it? I think they call it the quickening. I'm not a Christian, I'm an agnostic, but you know, that really makes sense. Some people call it, some of my colleagues, so to speak, or not so colleagues, because I'm not really on their intellectual level, but they would call it the great simplification. I've heard it referred to as that. Some people call it the fourth turning. I just call it the shizzy hitting the fizzy. Okay? Now, we have Belarus making the claim that, actually, you know what, before we go into Belarus and China, who apparently is getting ready to do a blockade of Taiwan, because what they're doing there is intimately tied to what's going on in Ukraine. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about how North Korea factors into that whole equation as well. Let's just hear what Sarah Cirillo has to say. But first, just remember, life imitates art. Okay? This is the ringmaster from the Hunger Games. Why am I showing you this now? Why do they put these eccentric people in front of us to tell us what's right and wrong? Why do they virtue signal? They're getting desperate, very desperate. You see, the Hunger Games is a great allegory for what's going on in the world right now. The Hunger Games and all the districts are just like countries. And basically here in the West, we're like District 1 and 2. And the rest of the world is, you know, some shade of districts 3 through 12, the poor districts. We're fortunate here. We can be decadent. We can get blue hair and, you know, choose whatever we want to be. If we want to be a cat, we can be a cat nowadays. And of course, correspondingly, you also have these jackboot thugs running around. So think about that for a second. You have this feminized group of people, whether by design or if that's just the natural trajectory of capitalist societies. We don't really know yet how this whole thing plays out. But you almost have this division now. You have these hardline, militarized police forces, and then you have these very decadent, dainty people who are just all about conspicuous consumption on the other hand. And what they do every once in a while is the districts get together and they send some contestants off to war. That's called conscription. It's a military draft. You know, Candace Averdeen, she got drafted by the military and sent off to war. That was the analogy there, I do believe. Another interesting thing happened, though, in that movie. And there was the autocratic leader, Snow, who overseen the 12 districts. You come to find in the end that he wasn't so evil after all, that in fact it was District 13 who was equally as evil, we'll say. It was the people who were so-called fighting for freedom who were equally evil. So, I mean, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. Pick your analogy. Anyways, I just thought I'd show you that before I show you this, and you can use your imagination. Here we go.
There's a reason you haven't heard from Gonzalo Lira yet with his so-called... There's a reason you haven't heard from Gonzalo Lira yet with his so-called attempts at asylum in Hungary. It's because the state security services, better known as the SBU, are some of the most talented and focused law enforcement agents across the globe. And in doing so, they knew where Gonzalo Lira was. There's a reason.
They knew where Gonzalo Lira was. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to triangulate the coordinates of a cellular phone, considering he was live streaming. The reason why Gonzalo did what he did is because he wanted to get his story out. I think he knew that he was likely going to be busted, and he wanted to immortalize his story on the internet so we would all know what went down in prison and we would hear his side of the story, because otherwise we're not going to hear it. Because this is what Matthew Miller's response was to, who was it? I think it was the Gray Zone guy. One of the guys from the Gray Zone, when questioned about Gonzalo Lira. They know exactly who he is, and they're being incredibly dismissive about the case, and you can tell by the smug look on this guy's face that they know what's going on, okay? And this is actually quite terrifying, guys, because if our government is this indifferent and essentially corrupt, just imagine what's going to happen when the shit hits the fan, when the mask comes off. Just imagine, okay?
for posting dissident content online, and you told me the State Department was aware of his arrest in May. And we learned last night through a series of tweets by him that he had been tortured in the Ukrainian prison, and he was now on a motorcycle with a broken rib trying to flee to the Hungarian border. And so I'm wondering, if this is true, given the State Department knew of his arrest and his detention, how has this been allowed to occur? We have a U.S. citizen being detained and perhaps tortured in the prison of one of our strongest allies.
Well, you lost me with the perhaps and the if this is true. I think I'd want to verify those reports before I commented on it. Alex, go.
Look at that smug deflection, that dismissiveness, that attitude of indifference. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes they just don't even seem like real people. Like, is it the makeup? Is it the lighting? I don't know. Anyways. All I can say, man, is the violence that underlies this so-called civilized democracy will manifest and will become all the more apparent. It's there, it's just hidden in the system right now. In fact, Andrew Tate released a video recently where he echoed something that I've said on the channel on numerous occasions, that there is a beast. In fact, one of my first videos was called The Beast Within. And it was all about how we mask our true animal nature and how it emerges in times of crisis. And I think the vampires are going to come out when the shizzy hits the fizzy, okay? It's just going to become obvious to people that this is not the Looney Tune Fantasyland, Disneyland experience we were told that it was going to be. Now, I can't show you this video of the ports being blown up in Romania, or right pretty much in Romania. Of course, this is something that could trigger Article 5 and lead us all to World War III. Now, the only good piece of news, there's two good pieces of news today, is that apparently Erdogan and Putin are still talking and they're planning some sort of visit. Why is this important? Well, Turkey's in NATO, and if they can do something, if they can create some sort of conditions for some peace negotiations down the road, if he even goes there, they're just talking about potentially going there because, of course, Putin was somewhat backstabbed by Erdogan and Hungary. What do you guys want to look at? Do you want to look at that, or do you want to let's just look at that. Actually, let's just look at the map. I'm going to spare you that experience. So that's the only real possible good news, is that there may be some attempt to initiate some kind of peace negotiations. Turkey is still kind of straddling the line. They're still on the fence with things, but by and large, they're 80% leaning towards NATO because, of course, Turkish manufacturers are going to be building a drone factory inside of Ukraine. So obviously, Ukraine is using a combination of NATO intelligence, Turkish military drone technology, and integrating this all into their own drone technology, of which they're going to use on August 24th. Supposedly, I wouldn't put much stock in those dates, but apparently a big drone swarm is coming to Moscow, and they're being very vocal about it. And the United States government is being indifferent to all this. They don't seem to be too concerned about the possible repercussions. They're convinced that Russia is not going to respond using nuclear weapons. We've been told all along that the Russians are a terrible shot, that they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with birdshot. And here they are striking targets with precision guidance systems right across a river in Romania, right across a sea or inlet or whatever it's called in Romania. So we know that we've been lied to a lot about this entire conflict. That's why it's illegal to take videos in Ukraine. And, it's not the only reason why. Obviously, there's legitimate national security concerns, clearly. But there should be, anytime you have that much control, it's very easy to be corrupted. So also in the world, before we talk about Justin Trudeau's divorce, I'm not going to really speak to that in the negative because, people have family issues. That would be a cheap shot, in my personal opinion. It is what it is. Let's hope that he doesn't take it out on the rest of us more than he already has. I'll just leave it at that. But Meta has started blocking news in Canada. It's ado with the Online News Act passed by Canadian Parliament in June. It forces platforms like Google and Meta to negotiate commercial deals with Canadian news publishers for their content. Interesting how they're trying to control the news in the run-up to World War III. No coinky-dink there whatsoever. We got record-setting wildfires in British Columbia. The most hectares burned already, and we're only partway through the forest fire season. And of course, we've completely shattered the wildfire records here this year. People are almost getting bored of hearing about it. The North Atlantic sea surface temperature is off the charts. There's a variety of reasons for that, partly owed to the warming of the planet, and apparently there was some volcanic incident that happened that is also contributing to some of these things. So there's a variety of different meteorological phenomena. Some of it stuff that's probably going to be irreversible, that's going to have unintended consequences that we're not fully aware of yet. We got the downgrade of the U.S. financial system from a AAA to a AA plus rating. That sent the markets in a tailspin today. The Dow Jones down 350 points, the NASDAQ down 310. It's important to note that while this has happened, the US dollar has actually increased about 1%. So really, did the NASDAQ lose anything at all in real terms? Not really, as far as I know. Anyways, I'm pretty sure that's not controlled for inflation as far as I know, because yeah, it wouldn't be, because you'd be pulling money out of the markets, so the valuation of the markets would be lower, corresponding to an increase monetary system that you're using to measure it in, which is the US dollar. So yes, and the ruble is continuing to decline. So in spite of all the, actually, you know what? I think that the ruble's decline, I just thought about this, it may be due compared to the dollar. It may not be so much that the Russian ruble is declining as much as people are using the US dollar as an economic safe haven. Whenever, doom is on the horizon, people flock into economic safe havens like the US dollar. So it may be that because there's greater demand for the dollar right now, by comparison, because everybody knows like the shit's hitting the fan, all this stuff is going on. You got a civil war or proxy wars breaking out in Africa between the Wagners and NATO and the US forces, and that's another story all to itself. We talked about it yesterday. But people are looking for a place to put their resources, their value. They need a reliable monetary system. So they're going to what they know, the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry, and that is the US dollar. And it's probably only because of that the ruble is declining, if you really think about it. So, keep that in mind when looking at this ruble, which is dropping like a stone for the last 7 or 8 months. Actually, since the war started, it kind of bounced back and now it's plummeting once again. Is it plummeting because it's really plummeting, or is it plummeting because the hysteria is driving people into the US dollar because it's for lack of better options, right? It's the global reserve currency. That's the only reason that it's retaining its value, is because that's what people have come to know. And people don't have confidence in the ruble as much yet, or China, the Chinese yuan, other currencies that are out there, the supposed BRICS gold-backed currency, whenever that's going to happen in the next 25, 30 years. That could be what it is. Maybe it's time to do some Forex trading into the ruble. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. Just know that right now the market is more overvalued than 95% of all history. Everything I've just told you, and the market is overvalued. It's higher in value than it's been any time in history, pretty much 95% of the time. I mean, that is just insane. Why is that? And that's controlled for inflation, so that's in real terms. So it's no surprise that people are starting to look at gold again. Remember, guys, the price of gold doesn't change. It doesn't change. You don't buy gold to get rich, because the only thing changes is the dollars that it's measured in. Uranium's going up again. I talked about that yesterday. Now, I should talk about the situation in Africa, because apparently the Nigerians, I don't even know what you would, because Nigeria is actually against Niger. But the guy who's leading the coup in Niger is calling on the Wagner Group for support to fight off the Americans who refuse to leave. Now, some would call that an occupation. However, you could make the argument that because there was this coup and the so-called democratically elected government that clearly many people in Niger believe is just a puppet government of the West and thus illegitimate, that they have been basically dethroned and the Americans are refusing to leave. So what it's going to boil down to is a fight between the Americans and the 1,500 French soldiers who are there. And these soldiers in Niger, I think there's around 10,000 in the military. I'm not sure if they've all defected and joined this coup. I don't know how many people are in this coup. I'm assuming it's in the thousands. But they're calling on the Wagner. Now, I'm not sure if the Russians are going to send them there. We know that the Russians are involved in Mali. And apparently the leader of this Niger coup went to Mali today to request assistance. So it's looking as though there's about to be a bit of a war in Africa, and it's going to be used as a proxy war. And so you're going to have Russians going up against the West there as well. In the very least, what this is going to do is going to create instability, which is going to send commodity prices skyrocketing once again. As we talked about yesterday, Africa is home to a lot of vital resources that Europe now needs because they've basically been cut off from Russia, who was supplying them with very cheap energy. Germany would likely be in a bull market right now if Nord Stream was operational. Instead, it's in the pisser. That's because, of course, Germany is still under U.S. occupation, and the Pax American dream is ending. Let's just put it that way. It's coming to an end. The period of contraction is nigh. So that's what it is. We also have some information coming out. I was sent a PDF today written by some Japanese analysts that estimate that China is seriously starting to look at imposing a blockade on Taiwan, and it could happen in the not so distant future. They reference the increasing amounts of incursions into Taiwanese airspace. As you can see, it's grown exponentially since the Pelosi visit in August, as well as the naval activity surrounding the region. It's in China's interest to impose a blockade and not go to direct war with Taiwan. However, the question remains, will the U.S. attempt to break the blockade, and what will China do in that instance? Keep in mind that this is a massive island. This is a massive area. And if there was a war or a blockade that broke out there, you're going to have a huge supply chain issue, because I'm not sure what the statistic is. I think 40% of the world's commodities go through the Taiwan Strait, and this is something to do with the trade winds. I talked about it in the past. Most of the ships, they got to go up here and they follow the ocean currents, and they come across the sea and they come to Vancouver and LA and Seattle. And so if they can't do that, they got to take the long way around, which is going to create all kinds of problems. And it's going to mean that you're not going to get cheap crap from China anymore. Or if you do get it, you're probably going to paying out the wazoo for it. Now, they claim that essentially the sharp increase in the number of Chinese military planes flying around Taiwan means that China is at the stage of mobilization for an immediate invasion of the island whenever necessary. So China has been slowly, covertly getting all the pieces together for when they want to impose this blockade, and they easily could. The question is, how is this related to what is going on in Ukraine? Are they really starting to consider doing it now that they believe that Russia has the upper hand in the Ukraine situation? Russia has been conducting joint naval drills with China in and around the Taiwan region, obviously sending a signal that they are a unified alliance as much as NATO is a unified alliance. So it seems as though there's some sort of relationship between what's happening on both sides of the globe. Is China seeing that this is their window of opportunity while the West is still occupied, or are they going to wait till the conflict is being completely dominated by the Russians in that neck of the woods and then make their move once NATO and the US alliance has been demonstrated to be weak? Because if we can't beat the Russians in Ukraine without going to nuclear Armageddon, then we're really not a threat to the Chinese takeover of Taiwan, or reacquisition of Taiwan, in their words. We also have the situation in North Korea. I read a very interesting article today, and this is why NATO is shitting bricks about North Korea. Okay, I'm going to quickly go over this. This is the border. They share a border here. So this is North Korea. They share a bit of a border with China and Russia as well. Let me see, where's their border with Russia? It's right up here. It's way up here. So they got to take the long way around. I'm pretty sure China will allow them some transit through there if need be. But Russia shares a border with China. North Koreans have a huge supply of Soviet-era military equipment. They have the artillery that Russia needs. Reason number 2, they have a massive, large standing army. And in fact, Kim Jong-un has said, we are willing to commit up to 500,000 troops if you need them for anything. You think that's helping NATO officials sleep at night? Nope. They're also immune to sanctions. They've been sanctioned so much that putting sanctions on North Korea is like throwing water on a duck at this point in time. It's not going to do a damn thing. And this is the problem with sanctions, okay? Sanctions work in the short term. They even work in the medium term. But what they do is they force a country to suffer and struggle in order to be self-reliant and find trade partners which may not be comparable to what is offered in the global markets, but that allow them to practice that self-sufficiency where they're truly self-sufficient, and you can no longer impose sanctions, and the only thing you can do then is either impose an embargo or go to war. And it's looking like that's going to happen. So they're immune to sanctions. They're unequivocally allied with Russia. They recognize the annexed territories as being Russian. Russian can supply them all the resources they need in return, the raw materials, the grains, the fuels, everything that they need in their society that they currently cannot get from other places because of the sanctions. And the US is basically incapable of blocking or embargoing them as well. They have a lot of nuclear weapons, and they're getting more and more every year. And they just have a deep-seated disdain for the West. I don't think any country out there hates the United States more than North Korea. So as much as we might not like what goes on in North Korea, and trust me, I am no fan of what goes on in North Korea. They do some atrocious things there to their populations, but we are starting to be similar in what we're doing in Ukraine in some respects. And I say we because this is supposed to be the beacon of hope for democracy. And they're doing this kind of thing to people who speak their mind, dissidents who, in my mind, I've been following from the start. I don't think he really posed any sort of tactical or national security threat other than that he had a difference of opinion. Now, was he smart to do that? No, I've talked about that before. You don't throw stones in a glass house. Gonzalo Lira was not exercising and practicing the art of war as Sun Tzu would. It was just not the right thing to do. There was no real point to it. He could have said everything he had to say outside of the country. There was nothing that he was saying, and this is why you really can't prosecute him for being a national security threat in a real tactical sense, because nothing he was saying required him to be there. He wasn't showing any locations. He wasn't giving away any secret. As far as I know, there might have been emails or something like that. But all I know, guys, is that that's exactly what's going to happen here when it all burns down. And I do believe that it's almost a trial run. It seems like it's the blueprint. It is, when the Emergency War Powers Act really gets put into place here, I don't think it's going to look much different than that. And they're going to get somebody, come on, that looks like this. And they're going to be entertaining, and all the kids are going to be indoctrinated into it already, into listening to that. And yeah. So all I can say is get ready, because It's not looking good. This period of economic contraction and reaching the limits of growth is going to be a wild, wild ride. Thanks for watching, guys. Canadian Prepper out.